exposed to, and our immune system cannot tackle it. So there are multiple stages where we can tackle it. First of all, stop it from entering our body. It needs an intercellular system. It cannot replicate on its own. It needs to be within the cell and hijacks our own cell to replicate itself. So we can stop its replication at that stage. Or we can make antigens available for our immune system to tackle it, so that not only this, but any future attacks, we are better prepared. So today it's a coronavirus, tomorrow it'll be some other virus. So it's going to go on. Are we going to just sit back and watch it? Or are we going to take actions? And we already have, as the technologies available. We can send the signal to the T cells, our defense line, and then tell them where to attack, how, when, how to attack those viruses. So that's how I would look at it.
Rakesh, I went to on a tour of your hospital here the other day. How many of you have been to the Cleveland Clinic here? So it felt like a Four Seasons. It was a beautiful facility, clean, modern. It didn't feel like a hospital. How does one get admitted?
So patients come into the hospital via traditional means you'd see in any Western academic medical center, typically either through the emergency department or through transfers. In fact, what's fascinating is that, I'll take the Four Seasons question in a moment, but what you mentioned is that everything was calm and peaceful, and that's intentional. Despite that, we care for some of the sickest patients in the country, if not the region. The case mix index, or level of severity of the patients we're caring for, including potential virus patients in Ohio, which is #1 in the US in terms of the complexity of the patients we see. So very, very sick patients that before we opened our doors in 2015 would either be airlifted out or not make it, or be on commercial airlines around the world. So we've done this along with the leaders and the regulators to serve the needs of the nation. In terms of the aesthetics, it's intentional, but not from a luxury point of view. We have leveraged the mind-body connection and ensured that we have culturally appropriate venues for patients and families to come together, again, in a culturally appropriate manner, so that patients can heal surrounded by the comforts of families and friends.
Let me ask you, Phil, for years we've heard, and when we talk about the future of medicine, for years we've heard precision medicine is coming. Has it arrived? What are your sales or other data show about whether it's part of the standard care in any diseases?
Yeah, well, like anything, it's coming in different regions at different paces. I think it's, with the cost coming down so significantly, it's a matter of time before an individual's genome becomes a foundational part of their care. And the information from that is drawn over time to help them make the right dietary, lifestyle, and health management choices. I think a glowing example of where it's really at the fore is the UK, in fact, where they've done the Genomics England project. They've sequenced 100,000 genomes, and this year they've decided to use that research-based information to make a decision to commission within their health system whole genomes, not for everybody, but where they saw the value today, and that is in rare disease and some types of oncology, the leukemias, pediatric oncology, and some sarcomas. So that's a very good example where they took an aggressive population-based approach. They seem very excited to partner with other countries. I know we've already engaged with entities within the GCC to achieve a similar vision, and we want to continue those discussions. But they took that approach, they sequenced, and then where they saw value for their population, they brought that into healthcare in a very real way, and are now paying for that from the single-payer health system. So I think that's a very good example. We can talk of many others, but I think that's probably the best example where genomic insight has gone from research and has been brought into the practice of medicine.
Why haven't there been, your first example is the UK, which is great, but why the UK? Why haven't there been more inroads?
I think there's still a lot of friction in each system. So in the United States, the friction is our fragmented system and a kind of crazy system of public and private payers creating headwinds. Where we see it happening in the United States is, not surprisingly, integrated health systems where they're managing the health of a population. That's where the value of genomics can be brought back. If you have the care of a group over their lifespans, that's where the investment in genomics comes back in health savings by earlier diagnosis and better management. For the past 10 years has been the cost. And that's why we've been laser focused at Illumina driving down that cost to make it affordable. Now the friction in the system is moving towards realizing the value, bringing that value back into the system. So the cost is not, it's still, we're still pushing down the cost, but it's less of the cost issue, more of bringing the value. And that's where integrated health systems are starting to see that, and that's where we see the most progress.
Anamika and Phil, Rakesh, do you see some of the same issues with cost?
If I may say,
Please.
I do agree genetics does solve certain rare diseases and many things, but what is important is gene expression. The many other factors like the day before you fall sick and the day after you fall sick, your genes remain the same except for some accumulation of somatic mutation that you accumulate. Gene expression changes. And this is why, although the genome was sequenced in 2000, first draft was given in 2003, we didn't do much progress into account epigenetics, microbiome, and of course telomere length, our biological aging. So it's the whole thing put together. That's where we'll see the precision medicine happening in full scale. So genes are very good. And of course, the same machines will sequence the DNA methylation also. When we say epigenetics, it's a vast range. But what has reached clinical stage is the methylations. And as we had multiple panels talking on longevity, they also spoke about the clocks, the aging clocks. So that's where we are getting there. We have made considerable progress, and we need more data, we need more work, but a lot can be done. And that's how I see it.
One thing, before I go to Rakesh, one thing I didn't ask all three of you have really interesting backgrounds that led you to where you are now. Could you talk for a second about your India background?
My background.
How you ended up here.
Okay. So I specialized in molecular applied and clinical genetics back in BHU, Banaras Hindu University, and I went on to join PhD, work on heat shock genes. The major work on genetics is done in Drosophila, so I was working on the stress response genes, and they play an important role. When our body is under stress, the housekeeping genes switch off, and the stress response genes come into play. And this gene doesn't have a protein product, it has a RNA product. So we are living the virus. Coronavirus is also, genetic material is a RNA. It's not a DNA, it's an RNA virus. So we are living in an RNA world, as you may read the book called RNA World. So what happens is the long non-coding RNA has a regulatory role. It regulates our genome, whether it's longevity, like we know, and many people have been talking about longevity and the hallmarks of aging. Long non-coding RNA has a role in every aspect of those longevity, the hallmarks of aging. And it's...
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, okay. So that's
No,
where...
that's great.
Yeah, so that's where that's my background, and I mean, I can keep talking, so...
No, that's great. And Rakesh, you're a heart specialist.
Yeah, I'm a heart surgeon. I specialize in robotic mitral valve repair and now transcatheter. And at the Cleveland Clinic, many of recovering heart surgeons become CEOs. So that's my next career, and I have the privilege of leading Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. I should say that I have a slightly different take. It's similar, foundational, but a different directional take on genetics and genomics. Much as the Fitbit initially was a curiosity and now has gone mainstream, or whatever personal wearable devices exist, they've become so popular because they're simple, they're cheap, and they provide actionable data. I'm a big believer that the genetic material that my colleagues are generating, if we're able to make that leap between where it is currently and making it simple, cheap, and actionable, I believe there's a huge upside. And how do I see this as a CEO and as a heart surgeon? Well, a couple of practical implications. Number one, we're building the nation's arguably foremost cancer center right now at Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi. 7th-floor, 185,000 square foot cancer center that will leverage the latest genomics to understand the population of Abu Dhabi and the UAE in a way that's never before been understood, in order as opposed to a blunt hammer. So we will be studying the genetic makeup of the population of the UAE and targeting the genetic therapies towards those cancers, number one. Number two, being a cardiovascular center for excellence, it's incredibly important that we understand how the cardiovascular drugs that we use either help, don't impact, or hurt our patients. And a practical example of that is an antiplatelet agent. So when you have a stroke or you have a heart stent, you are put on an antiplatelet agent called Plavix, for instance. And genetics have told us that some people either respond very aggressively to this drug, don't respond at all, or respond in a normal way. And therefore, we're able to tailor these drugs as opposed to putting them on the drug and then them having a catastrophic brain bleed, for instance, that can cause people to die. So I'm very, very excited about genetics and genomics, and I'd like to see them disseminated in the same way as wearables in society.
Do you find any resistance from the doctors?
Not at all. People love data. You think that people get overwhelmed by data, and yes, they do if it's too much, too complex, and not actionable. But you give a person a heart rate, and I can tell you could be watching the most exciting football game or hockey game or whatever sport you like to watch, and you just watch people with wearables on. They're checking their heart rate every 30 seconds, every minute, even though they're absolutely normal. And I believe that the same will be true not only of the static genetic picture that we've spoken about, but also the evolving time clock picture about how the genes and parts of the genetic code can be modified by meditation, exercise, diet, stress, things like viruses and drugs and chemicals that can be carcinogenic. So I think there'll be a static picture as well as a reprobing picture of sort of either a wearable or some type of device that you could probe your genome on an ongoing basis. That's how I see in the future.
Do you all see doctors embracing data in that way?
I think provide genetic data back to physicians where it has an important impact on the management of their patients. They do embrace it. The challenge is getting it back in that setting within the systems that they're working with. Across the globe, there are different levels of adoption of electronic health records. In the United States, it's a fragmented system. And there's incredible physician fatigue because they're getting overwhelmed with the administrative tasks through the electronic health record that a lot of times they're crying uncle with the data fatigue. But if you can break through that, at the end of the day, physicians have a patient in front of them. They have to solve the problems. We were talking earlier, I am very optimistic that AI and other advanced analytics, when incorporated into these systems and fostering decision support, will help prioritize that time, the small amount of time physicians have with their patients. And I think in that setting, we'll be able to draw upon baseline genetics of their gene expression, to prioritize what do you have to focus on. Do you have to focus on cardiovascular health, metabolic health? Do you have to focus on cancer? I think when presented like that, physicians are absolutely open.
And a little bit about your background.
So I'm a medical oncologist, spent 20 years in academia in the United States and transitioned to industry 7 years ago because I got frustrated that the gene expression signatures and the molecular diagnostics I was discovering in the lab just weren't getting any traction to patients. And so in the setting of a commercial entity, I really hope to have the kind of impact to make sure genomics gets into that decision process to improve care.
Over that period, have you been encouraged or more frustrated than you thought you'd be?
It's a mix. There are times I'm incredibly frustrated. Pharmacogenomics is a good example, and your example of Plavix or clopidogrel. I mean, we know 15 to 20% of most populations are getting a placebo-based. Placebo, your chances of re-stenosis of that stent and dying go up incredibly, threefold higher. And yet, in the United States, there's very little pharmacogenomics testing of patients who are getting stents. And so it's very frustrating at times. At other times, you see pioneers like the Cleveland Clinic and other health systems that are really moving out forward, like the Vanderbilts, that are taking control and moving in a very progressive way. So it's a mixture.
I should add to that point. It's a very good point. You need the right partner. And we're blessed here at Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi to be working with a stakeholder with as much vision as Mubadala. So Mubadala have leveraged platforms like genetics and genomic investigations and have encouraged us to integrate them into artificial intelligence platforms. So we're looking at, for instance, putting this into our own app so that doctors have access to it and patients have access to it, and they can be processed and they can spit out and deliver actionable steps for both doctors and patients.
Anamika, where do you fall on the physician fatigue question?
Physician using AI and divided into neurology, cardiology, all other departments that we have. You're not looking, we have traveled to molecular level. Look at it as a holistic system. So multi-dimensional, for coming to AI, collecting data, but multi-dimensional data. If you know, you must be all knowing Eric Topol and his famous picture where he has genomics, epigenomics, microbiome, and all the data, even your for your vital statistics through your wearable gadgets and all the data that we can integrate together. And then we lack the markers. We do have certain markers like testing your BP is a marker. So we have molecular markers, whether it's aging, whether it's diseases. So other markers we do, through population study, we have got many markers, but we need more data, and there are already companies working on it, where they are coming up with markers. They are coming up with the potential markers and then making it actionable. So those are the actionable data that doctors will have, and where AI is stepping in to help them, and doctors, yes, are using.
Let me ask you, Phil, my colleague at STAT, Matt Herper, wrote a piece about your company and said you're a DNA sequencing powerhouse. Illumina has been a fast-growing scientific tools company waiting on a medical revolution. But DNA sequencing progress has been achingly slow. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, Illumina's been around for 21 years. The vast majority of that time has been the best-in-class platform for research and development. However, in 2019, 40% of our sequencing consumable revenue was from clinical applications. So whether it's genetic disease, oncology, reproductive health, think about NIPT testing, which is a pregnancy test, a test for common trisomies. It's one of the most rapidly adopted tests there have ever been in diagnostics. So it is happening in different areas where it's found to serve a need in genetic diagnosis. And really at Illumina, we want to be the platform of choice. We've shown we've been a great partner for the UK through the Genomics England collaboration, and really have an established track record of taking on now these public health population level programs where you're starting to see hundreds of thousands of who's going to respond to Plavix, who's not, understand who's at risk for cancer, who's not, and we hope to continue to serve that group very well.
What's your hardest partner, the U.S.?
Well, each partner's different. You know, there are challenges and opportunities. So the U.S. is hard because it's so fragmented.
Right, as you
so
said,
that's the hardest part. However, U.S. also has a very strong laboratory-developed test network, so there's a lot of innovation in those laboratory-developed tests, where outside of the United States, you move more towards in vitro devices, regulated products, and so that's a different challenge. So the challenges are there. I think we have to focus on continuing to drop the cost, and we're doing that, and we have a path to get to drive it down further. I mean, we've gone from $3 billion for the first whole genome back in 2003 to now, $600 to $700 for a genome. So that's been a remarkable reduction in cost. We want to push it down to 100 and below. But we also have to build that value story, and that's where integrating into healthcare where the value will increase.
Let me see if there are any audience questions in our remaining time.
I have a question. As you think about whole genome sequencing, the concept, almost the existential question about who owns the data and who accesses the data and how ring-fenced the personalized data can ever be is fascinating. I mean, I'm hearing about crime cases that have been sorted out based on genome sequencing done decades later, et cetera. How do you think about that?
Yeah, there's nothing more personal than your own genome, right? And so we're in an industry, and we absolutely pay very close attention to privacy, patient autonomy as far as their choices with respect to how that data is used, and confidentiality. And so at Illumina, we very much have the perspective is that the individual, the genome's their data, and it's up to them to figure out how to share, and it's up to us to protect that data. So that's very much the approach we have. We think over time, there's great value in sharing of genomes. That's the only way we're going to fully understand all the information. Really, for AI to have an impact on really understanding the value of the genome, you need to get to 1 million, 10 million genomes that you bring together, associate with phenotype like high blood pressure or cardiovascular disease, like metabolic disease, and then understand who's at greatest risk. There are now best practices to do that kind of sharing where the data all stays in the region. So most countries are establishing data rules around genetics that the data can't leave. They have to be hosted in country. But there's still ways of keeping the data and keeping the control in country, but still federating it at a level that we can genome. It's a major challenge. It's something we stay very focused on and that we protect dogs.
But how private really is it? I hear that you can even determine who a person is without even identification of their name. I mean, their genomic fingerprint is so unique that you could figure it out. I'm told without any documented identification, even if you randomize the subset.
No, you don't need to sample very much of the genome for it to be unique to that individual. Now, what you also need is you need another sample from that individual to sequence to match.
Yeah.
So that creates some safety, and then you have to have the sharing to pull together. So there's enough, I think, appropriate barriers and privacy to avoid that kind of identification. It is something where we know people will, with ill intent, will act, and that's why we're so careful in making sure we have all this.
That the data, medical data, and genomics, epigenetics, it's an asset. Just like property is an asset, personal data is an asset, and companies are also already talking about how we can trade it for a service or a product.
On a positive note, like looking ahead with all the technology in the next 15, 20 years, can each of you talk about your dream scenario of where we have the potential to be in the future? Starting with Phil.
Yeah, I guess for me, I would hope that each country takes on this issue and takes on leveraging genetics for the health of their populations and the specific bespoke needs in the health of their populations. I think that does start with population genomics effort that has to be mostly driven by a country, by leadership in a country, but then we'll develop a ecosystem of private companies that can then provide services to optimize health. And while that's going on, I look forward to a crowdsourcing of the annotation of the human genome. So regardless of where that patient is, they can draw from that knowledge that is aggregated over many countries and many millions of individuals.
30 years in medicine to date, there's no doubt that the therapies have become more sophisticated. Not a question. But from my vantage point, many people miss the big questions. And these problems persist across the globe, whether it's in California, Minnesota, Ohio, London, or Abu Dhabi. And there's three big challenges in medicine, global medicine. The first is access. Patients have difficulty accessing the right provider at the right time for the right condition. Number two is coordination of care. Once you get into a system, it's very difficult to navigate it through as a patient without appropriate guardrails and protocols and wayfinders. And the third is experience. Patients don't enjoy the experience of healthcare, generally speaking, nor do providers, with an all-time high in burnout. So from my perspective, a very proactive approach in dealing with each of these three perennial problems. We believe that the solution will be found in leveraging technology, and genomics and genetic understanding is a big part of that. So I think we're going to make great progress in the decade to come. Would be my prediction.
Do you count your blessings that you're leading sort of such an extraordinary facility where all the structural elements are in the place for success, and most people don't have that?
Yeah, I really do feel blessed, and there's three unique things about Cleveland Clinic Abu Dhabi that I haven't experienced anywhere else in the globe. Number one is the visionary leadership of the nation and the emirate. I mean, they truly set their sights, as you're seeing at this meeting, on addressing the big problems in society: health, education, culture, safety, et cetera, et cetera. Number one. Number two is there's a need of the people for great health care, and this has been addressed head on as part of the society of the future. And number three is great stakeholders. The partnership between Mubadala and the Cleveland Clinic has been an enduring one. Through ups and downs, has continued to grow and strengthen and progress, and we've set our sights on things, make our project not only one of the most visible globally, but thankfully one of the most successful partnerships of its type.
Anamika.
I would say consumers becoming educated. They are already moving towards decentralized healthcare, and we are already moving towards that. So far, we just talked about centralized. So consumers becoming more empowered, educating them. We as a centralized, either primary, secondary, or tertiary care, educating them, having plans for educating them what is right, what is wrong. They anyways Google everything. So having a proper education system for them and giving them, empowering them. Let them drive what is required by them, and let them drive what the future needs and what they need. That's how my take in it.
Great. Well, thank you for three very different and very illuminating perspectives. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.